I have found a processor upgrade for the G4 Cube that is so incredibly rare, I can hardly believe that I'm holding it. This little red behemoth is arguably the fastest possible single CPU upgrade ever compatible with the Cube, at least in terms of raw gigahertz. So today, let's swap out the Sonnet upgrade that's already in this Cube and see just how insanely fast this new processor is. So stay tuned. So what we have here is a newer technology processor upgrade, which boasts a G4 7448 processor clocked at a blistering 2 GHz with 1 MB of level 2 cache. That is a far cry from this Cube's stock 450 or 500 MHz processor, and quite a lot faster than the Sonnet 1.2 GHz that we currently have in this Cube. Originally sold for PowerMac G4 towers, this upgrade is notable in that it fits well into the Cube, and the previous owner of this upgrade has actually included a custom machined solid copper heat spreader that keeps the processor nice and cool. And from everything I've seen, this is likely the fastest upgrade possible for the Cube, at least for a single processor. Sonnet upgrades max out at 1.8 GHz, but I have heard anecdotal stories of people who had newer technology upgrade cards which actually have a dual processor socket, and they had 1.6 or 1.8 GHz processors that they overclocked to 2 GHz and had a dual 2 GHz setup in their Cube, and that's gotta be the holy grail, but this is one step beneath that, and it's going to be a heck of a performance increase over this Sonnet. And this upgrade also has some other cool features, such as a built-in temperature sensor and a VRM bypass mode to power the processor without overloading the Cube's power circuitry, although our aftermarket VRM is more than powerful enough for this monstrosity. And what's interesting about this newer tech processor upgrade is that even though this is a single CPU upgrade, it's actually on a dual CPU PCB, and if you look underneath the heatsink here, you can see there's actually room for a second processor, and all of the circuitry that's over here, there's actually the pads for it just blank over on the other side. So theoretically, you could put another processor here and just populate all of this stuff on this side, and it would work, although that's probably very close to impossible, but not entirely impossible. I can dream. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for making this upgrade possible. Thanks to my supporters on Patreon and all of you who watch these videos every week, I was able to afford to bid on this crazy rare upgrade and beat out the other people who are also vying for this very rare auction. And I'm extremely excited to bring it to you here today. So if you're not subscribed to the channel and you like these kinds of Macintosh shenanigans, please consider doing so because it really helps make this kind of thing possible. So what I think would be really interesting to do today is take a benchmark of where the Cube is with the Sonnet upgrade that's in here, and then also pop into our Minecraft server and take a look at what the frame rate is in the spawn area, which has actually now been completely populated by all of you building really cool stuff, but that actually brings the frame rate down pretty low, especially for the PowerPC machines that the server was really intended for. So we'll see how playable that spawn section is in our Cube with the Sonnet, and then we'll pop in that 2 GHz upgrade and see how much of a difference that makes. So first let's run Geekbench. And we can see on here, we have our PowerPC 7445 or 7455 at 1.2 gigahertz, which is a much older G4 processor than the one that we're going to put in here. So we'll run our PowerPC 32-bit benchmarks here. Okay, so I actually had to run this test twice because the first time I ran it, I accidentally had 10.4fox open, but this is an unpolluted result of 679, and we will obviously save this for comparison. Okay, next let's pop into our Minecraft server and see what kind of frame rate we get in Spawn. All right, this is not really looking too good. I mean, it still works. But yeah, as you can see, it's a bit of a slideshow here. Now, I did increase the settings to normal draw distance. I bet if I decrease the settings to minimal draw distance, we'd have a little bit better results, but I really like to have the normal draw distance on. So yeah, we are getting between 3 and 4 FPS, and that's just a little bit low. So yeah, let's just look at what minimum draw distance would do for the frame rate here. There we go, render distance, tiny. All right, seems a little better. Yeah, so with tiny render distance, we're getting between 5 and 6 FPS. All right, let's crack open the cube once again. Oh, and I almost forgot, we need to install firmware to make sure the cube can actually boot from the much newer G4 processor, but no matter what I did, I could not get the ISO of this disk to flash to a bootable FireWire partition. So we're going to have to do this the ridiculous way and just dangle a full-size CD-ROM drive out of the front of the cube and boot it like that. All right, is this ridiculous? Yes. Will it work? Man, I hope so. All right, well, it sounds like this CD-ROM drive is dead. Well, it turns out the only working IDE optical drive I had is the super drive out of my running G5 Power Mac, which means I had to shut that machine down to salvage it. And I guess that means that today's episode is brought to you by inconveniencing the nice people trying to play Minecraft. Okay, so I had to hold down the programmer switch on the back of the cube, power it on, and then kind of guess when to push the C key because there's no internal speaker to hear the bong that you're supposed to listen to. But I've timed it correctly, and now I'm in this blue kind of open firmware screen with all of the flashing options. And basically, I just have to hit the number 5 to apply all of the patches. But once I do, I can no longer boot from the Sonnet card, at least until I reset the NVRAM again. And then if I do reset the NVRAM, I have to run this whole setup utility again. So that's kind of annoying, but I'm about to press 5 and all right, flash was successful. And now I'll push 7 to set up NVRAM for booting into OS 10. And yeah, it's done. Press 8 to shut down. And now let's install the new processor. Okay, and while we have this thing completely stripped down, I kind of want to try to replace this small fan with a larger one. So I have this Be Quiet fan, which, as it is, can't really fit in there, but I think we can modify this by cutting off some of this plastic to actually fit in there just fine. So let's try to do that. All right, so I'm just going to need to cut off these bottom bits here, and I think that'll give it clearance to slide underneath these metal bits. All right, well, that was pretty painful, but I got it. Let's see if it fits in. All right, the new fan's in there, and it's pushed right up against the bottom of the grate, so it is exactly the size of that cavity in there. And that's going to provide a lot better and quieter airflow. So I'm going to screw this in, and we should be good to go. Now, of course, the screws are not long enough, so I'm going to have to find different screws, I guess. Okay, so it's the next day, and I just could not find these correct size M3.5 screws anywhere locally, so I wound up having to order them, and they should be here on Friday, but until then, I don't think this fan sitting like this is going to prevent us from checking out if this processor works or not, because it's kind of wedged in there, and although it does move around, it's not like it's falling around freely, because there is some friction, at least a little bit, holding it in place. So I'm going to continue on putting this together, and the next step is going to be cleaning off the tiny bit of thermal compound that's on this heatsink here. There we go, clean as the day it was new. We'll just make sure there aren't any residual fibers. All right, now for the main event. Let's take off this Sonnet processor. And install our 2 gigahertz behemoth. All right, and now we don't actually need this heatsink anymore. This copper takes the place of it because this covers the processor, whereas this one would not actually cover the processor properly because it's not actually aligned correctly. Okay, now to install this back into the cube, all we have to do is spread some thermal compound on this copper plate here, which is going to be making contact with our newly cleaned main heatsink, and that will keep temperatures well under control. So I have some Arctic Silver 5 and a little spreader here, so let's get this stuff on there. All right, I really felt like Bob Ross there painting happy little thermal compounds, but yeah, that's pretty good coverage. Let's install the board. All right, the copper plate and the heatsink seem to be making good connection, and I don't see any light passing between them. So it seems like I have enough thermal compound. Let's put the rest of this machine back together. And one thing the seller kindly noted to me was that these processor screws no longer should be screwed in until they touch something because that other plate is now removed. So they really should just be screwed in until there's a bit of tension in the spring so that we don't damage the processor. So I'll do that now. All right, well, I think we're ready to test this out. I've got everything connected together again, I think. And yeah, we'll do the smoke test. And do you ever have that horrible feeling like you forgot something? Because I kind of have that feeling right now, but here we go. Hey, that's a good sign. All right. Are you telling me that we seriously got this first try, no issues? That's amazing. I'm extremely excited. All right, let's take a look at what About This Mac says. Oh my God, look at that. 2 gigahertz PowerPC G4 and our 1.5 gigs of RAM. That is absolutely incredible. I cannot believe this worked straight out of the gate. It doesn't quite know what the processor name is, but that's okay because we have our 2 gigahertz and our 1 meg of L2 cache. That's so incredible. First try, no issues, and we're set. All right, why don't we run our benchmarks? So we'll pop open Geekbench. And Geekbench recognizes our processor now as the 7448 at 2 gigahertz. And we'll run these benchmarks. All right, test complete. And boy, is that a heck of a number. So we scored 1046 on our Geekbench score. And if we open up the original Sonnet, we had 679. And that is a whopping 54% increase in our score. That's absolutely incredible. Our processor integer performance went from 900 to 1438. Floating point performance went from 771 to 1194. Memory performance is up quite a lot. Memory bandwidth about the same because that didn't change. But yeah, that's absolutely incredible. What a huge difference this, huge different processor has made. That's incredible. I'm very excited about that result. All right, let's pop into Minecraft and see if we get any better frames with this massively better processor. Certainly launched a lot quicker. All right, I mean, it's still choppy, but it feels way smoother. Let's put this back to normal. All right, so before it was definitely a slideshow. Now it's still pretty low FPS, but it's actually playable here in Spawn. So let's see, what are we getting for our frame rate? All right, so here in Spawn with normal draw distance, we are getting 6-7 frames per second, dipping down to 5. But if you remember, that's what we were getting really on the tiny draw distance on the Sonnet processor. Okay, let's set draw distance to tiny and see what we have. Hey, now we're getting 15 frames per second. Yeah, we're in the solid teens. Wow, that's awesome. Here's our huge specs wall. Yeah, this is like a night and day difference. And I bet if we get out of Spawn, we'll start seeing some really good frame rates. All right, we're out of Spawn and we are now at 30 frames per second. Buttery smooth out of this G4 cube. Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, we're dropping down to the 20s, but going up to past 30, so 35 as we get farther away from Spawn. Going down the Rainbow Road, it touched 40 frames per second. Wow. That's amazing. This is beyond my expectations, honestly. Let's set our render distance back to normal. And let's see if we get respectable frame rates on normal. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what your definition of respectable is. So it's in the teens over here on normal. Let's see if we get a little further away, if we get some better frames. Yeah, seems to be sticking on the teens. Hey, check it out. Here's that awesome Ryzen processor. Which now that we have a normal draw distance, we can see the whole thing in one go because it's gigantic. But yeah, sticking just under 20 frames per second. not too bad for a G4. Let's put it right down to render distance short and have a happy little medium. Yeah, so short render distance, 30 frames per second. That is night and day compared to the Sonnet G4. Yeah, dipping down to the teens, but it's perfectly playable, 100%. Hey, we have a friend. Goodbye, friend. Wow, just look at this MacBook Pro. That is amazing with the touch bar and everything. And we are getting 37 frames per second. So, wow, 38, 45. Yeah, we're now in the 40s and 50s. Wow. Almost touching 60 frames per second while we were sitting there admiring this gigantic MacBook Pro in space gray. That's amazing. This G4 processor at 2 GHz, 7448, it's absolutely incredible. And check it out, we're even getting a playable frame rate perfectly reasonable here in Aqua Vid, which is the optimized 10.4 Fox box, specifically for YouTube. But look at that, this is not even in the lowest resolution, and it's perfectly acceptable. Yeah, this is in 240p, so one step above 144p, but still, honestly not too bad. Let's up it to 360p and see what it looks like. Yeah, so honestly, a perfectly watchable frame rate here, even on 360p, which was an absolute slideshow on the Sonnet 1.2 GHz. But when we set this to 240 on this processor is better than 144 on the Sonnet. So really absolutely incredible, better than I could have expected. So there you have it, an incredibly successful upgrade to the G4 Cube, now sporting a ludicrous 2 GHz 7448 G4 processor. I am so excited with the performance increase, jumping 54% from the Sonnet 1.2 GHz, which was already a crazy processor to have in this machine, which again originally came with a 450 or 500 megahertz processor. And honestly, upgrading this cube has been incredibly rewarding. I never thought I would own one of these machines. It's been kind of a holy grail for me. And here I am with this incredibly upgraded version. And yeah, thank you so much, all of you who watch these videos every week, because you're the ones who made this possible, and I am so incredibly grateful. And sure, every once in a while I get comments like, oh, you should just put a PC or a Macintosh inside the cube, but you know, that's not what this channel is about. I like taking kind of, especially cosmetically challenged, cool Macs like this kind of chipped up cube and trying to push the original hardware as far as it can go. And we've really done that. There's not that much more that we could put in this cube. I'll always be on the lookout for a crazy dual processor to stick in here, but yeah, this 2 GHz processor, absolutely incredible. I'm so happy to have it. And once I get those fan screws in, then yeah, this thing will really be buttoned up. And yeah, we'll see what other kind of crazy experiments we can do now that we have this souped up cube. But if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more Macintosh shenanigans like this, please subscribe down below. And thank you very much for watching. And a special thanks to Justin, Chris, Rutk Mods, Sorta Eclectic, and Spike, who are my highest tiered patrons, and all of my Patreon supporters for helping make these videos possible.